presentation from council staff and planning department staff, and then any questions that might be arisen at that time between councilors and staff. And then after that, we have some folks signed up to speak for public comment. We'll hear from them. Because we're combining these bills, we're going to give 3 minutes to each speaker on the public comment. It really is one bill with some more or less technical addenda, I guess, with the other items, but they're very much related, obviously, to the comp plan document that's being worked on. So, and we will be hearing this a second hearing after this, so I think that will be in theory anyway. That will be 2 weeks from now. But let's go ahead and hear the presentation from council staff.
Thank you, Mr. President, councilors. Before I start, I'd like to point out that we have a handful of printed copies of the presentation up here, if anybody from the audience would like one. So starting this evening, the council is considering 3 bills related to the future growth of the city. The key items is the updated comprehensive plan, which will be adopted by R16-108. The companion ordinance and resolution 109 and 027 would change cross-references in city code to reflect changes made if this updated comp plan is ultimately adopted. The comprehensive plan is jointly adopted by the city and the county and provides the policy framework for land use and transportation decisions made as the city grows. It does not establish regulations, but rather establishes what development should look like in different parts of the city. Regulatory systems like the zoning code implement the comp plan with the shall language that codifies specific requirements for development. The comp plan's policies are used for analyzing proposed changes to regulations, such as zone changes and large development proposals, and to develop new plans and standards. The comp plan also lays out a development vision and recommends priority public investments to incentivize and fulfill that vision, such as capital investments in infrastructure. As I previously mentioned, what is before you tonight is an update to the existing comp plan, which was first adopted in 1989 and has been amended several times since. It's worth noting here that there are several key concerns highlighted and current in the existing comp plan that remain challenges today, and these include the jobs housing imbalance between the east and west sides, increasingly congested river crossings, and geographic or jurisdictional limits to growth on 3 sides of the city. This update emphasizes coordinating land use and transportation, particularly the addition of premium transit services and additional mobility policies in an attempt to address these issues more effectively over the next 20 years. It aims to encourage compact, walkable infill growth along existing corridors as an alternative to single-use development on the west side that has characterized much of the city's growth in the last 20 years. The comp plan recognizes that this is an auto-oriented city, and we don't expect that to change completely in the foreseeable future. But one of the plan's overarching goals is to provide viable, safe alternatives like walking and biking, parking once and walking to multiple destinations, and taking transit for people who would prefer to do so. So the public process for this effort began 2 years ago and included contacts with hundreds of residents. For this update, we started with a big picture during a series of workshops that confirmed the centers and corridors development vision that's been in the comp plan since 2001. Follow-up series of public focus groups focused or provided an opportunity to talk about specific challenges and strategies to address them. Based on this input, the team moved on to drafting updated goals, policies, and narratives. This effort included public work sessions to generate these ideas and then subsequent opportunities to confirm draft content. Multiple drafts were released to the public and revised based on stakeholder input. The project team did hold meetings in all quadrants of the city over the last couple of years during daytime and evening hours in an effort to account for varying family and work schedules. There were also multiple meetings held for each milestone in the process to ensure that everybody had a chance to participate. In addition to these public meetings, the project team held one-on-one meetings with residents and property owners who made presentations to organizations, neighborhood associations, and coalitions, set up information tables at community events like the Downtown Growers Market and Ciclovia. The outreach for this project, efforts to get people involved, included newspaper, radio, bus shelter, and internet advertising, articles in local media and neighborhood news, and direct email, regular direct email to a listserv of about 10,000 people. Besides providing written input, staff and leadership from more than 20 local agencies and city and county departments participated in workshops, drafting sessions, focus groups, and other means to work on this draft. All of these interactions with the public and government agencies helped us build relationships and buy-in on implementation, and has helped improve the comp plan in several ways, which I'll go into now. So the updated vision map builds on the existing centers and corridors map, which was first amended into the comp plan in 2001 as an offshoot of the planned growth strategy project. It aimed to accommodate as much new growth as possible in designated activity centers connected by a network of multimodal transportation corridors. This updated centers and corridors vision map adds additional detail that further clarifies the hierarchy of both the corridors and the centers. So for instance, rather than expecting walkable, fine-grained development in every single center around the city, this update really seeks to focus dense walkable development in 3 places. A downtown that would continue to serve as a hub for the city, and then 2 additional urban centers, one on each side of the city, where we can really focus on creating walkable districts. Similarly, some centers are identified for creating employment opportunities, especially on the west side, which is one way the comp plan seeks to address the jobs, housing, and balance. And speaking of activity centers, I should note that the comp plan vision map does not add any centers that have not been previously adopted through some formal public process, such as a city or county adoption of a master plan or sector plan or a comp plan amendment. Part of the update involves updating the corridor types on the centers and corridors map, including the introduction of premium transit corridors to be consistent with the Mid-Region Council of Governments Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which identifies a priority network of high-frequency, high-capacity transit to help solve congestion problems in the future. And also the introduction of Main Street corridors, which came out of a visioning process from members of the public saying they wanted to see more areas around the city that had kind of a walkable Main Street character. The premium transit corridors refer to those routes that are under consideration by regional or local transit agencies for, as I mentioned, high capacity or high frequency services. The proposed designation of Coors Boulevard as a premium transit corridor has been the subject of many public comments, and I expect you'll hear more of those tonight. This designation is an adaptation of the existing major transit corridor designation in the current comp plan. This proposed update is both consistent with comp plan's existing designation as a major transit corridor and updated to be a premium transit corridor as shown in priority transit network in the NTP. Coors was also, I should note, mapped by residents as a priority corridor for transit improvements during the visioning workshops that the project team held in the summer of 2015. The designation does encourage some density bonuses for transit-oriented development. The view protection regulations from the Coors Corridor Plan have been incorporated into the draft integrated development ordinance, which I'll touch on briefly in a couple minutes. And it would supersede any bonuses that could impact views to the east. And additionally, these bonuses would not be applicable until such time as a high-capacity, high-frequency transit system was implemented on the corridor. At the same time, the project team recognizes that it's important to protect certain areas from the negative impacts of growth over the next 25 years. The comp plan update introduces a new tool called areas of change and areas of consistency, which can be thought of as a sort of yin and yang of where we want to direct growth and where we want to keep it away from areas that the residents are concerned about. These areas were mapped based on the centers and corridors map, existing metropolitan redevelopment areas, and other boundaries where city policy already encourages growth. You have heard people say that they don't want to have intense development near their neighborhoods. Single-family neighborhoods in the city are mapped as areas of consistency where major changes are not encouraged and where the policies in the comp plan aim to ensure that new development in those areas is comparable in scale and intensity to existing uses. Meanwhile, areas of change are where you do anticipate, plan for, and encourage the growth that we're expecting. So balancing out this talk of density is a better discussion in this updated comp plan about what we need to protect even as the city grows. The narratives and policies on these issues are improved over today's comp plan. During the public process for the comp plan update, the project team heard loud and clear from residents that they really want to see the city's distinct residential neighborhoods, open spaces, rural areas, acequias, and cultural landscapes protected. In general, the updated narratives in many of the chapters helps to highlight and celebrate our blend of unique cultures and geographies. These narratives are informed by a set of new guiding principles for the comp plan based on themes that emerged during the public process. And each chapter can be viewed through these lenses and with policies and narratives that relate to each. Finally, the comp plan establishes a set of actions to implement the plan's policies. All these actions were co-written or have been vetted by their respective implementing departments or agencies, and would create a system by which the planning department could analyze their performance toward achieving plan goals as part of an ongoing and regular cycle of comp plan updates. So as you know, the comp plan is one part of the ABC to Z project, which also involves a reworking of the city's 1970s era zoning code, and the zoning code being the shall component of our land use regulation system. Because many public comments have dealt with both parts of the ABC to Z process, in the next couple slides I'll delve a little bit into how the comp plan corresponds to the integrated development ordinance, which the Environmental Planning Commission will be considering at its first hearing next month, and which we do expect will come before you sometime this summer. It's important to note that the vote that you'll be taking on the comprehensive plan is entirely separate from the consideration of zoning, changes to the review and approval processes for land development, or what will happen with sector development plans. I do want to go into this now to make it clear how they are related in the ABC to Z project, but also to make the distinctions between the comp plan and the IDO clear, so you can keep them separate in your deliberations about the question of whether the updates to the comp plan are worth adopting. So first, I'll briefly touch on sector plans. As a part of this process, we have been looking carefully at our adopted sector plans and area plans to make sure that the careful community planning that is reflected in those documents finds its way not only to the comp plan, but into the IDO as well, the regulatory component, and into the community planning assessments in the future. So to reiterate, the comp plan establishes a sort of the where we want to go as a city, with a focus on providing alternatives to single-use residential development that can help reinvigorate existing corridors and activity centers. Once that vision is established, the Integrated Development Ordinance, or IDO, and other regulatory tools address the how we get there by providing specific regulations for development scale and intensity and landscaping, and buffering from sensitive uses like residential or open space. The community planning assessment process in the updated comp plan provides a new framework for small area and community planning. Technically, the city is supposed to be updating sector plans every 10 years, but most of the sector plans in the city now are well over 10 years old, and some recent attempts to update them have not reached the finish line. At this time, there are no plans, staff, or budget to update the rest of the 60 existing plans around the city that establish zoning, or to develop additional plans to cover the 50% of the city that has no sector plan currently. And we only expect this to get worse over time. So this new process that is proposed in the comprehensive plan allows coverage of the entire city in a 5-year cycle using the existing staff and budget. And we believe this is a more realistic and efficient approach to planning at the community level. So with regard to the process moving forward, first I should note that in your packets and available to the public on the project website is the council green line version of the comp plan document. The green line reflects some changes that were recommended by staff, the project staff, based on public comment received during the LUPS process, especially during the first LUPS hearing. We do expect, as Councilor Fenton mentioned, at least one more hearing on this. That first hearing would be tentatively scheduled for January 18th. The Integrated Development Ordinance, the regulatory half of this project, is expected to have its first hearing on February 2nd at the Environmental Planning Commission, the first of what are expected to be several. And later in January, there will also be a couple of events to allow members of the public who maybe are just now tuning into the project to learn more about how the IDO works and how the regulatory system works. So with that, I'd like to ask Project Manager Michaela Renz-Whitmore and Urban Design and Development Director Russell Brito to join me here at the podium for any questions that the council may have.
there's any questions for staff. Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Andrew. We appreciate all the work you put in on this. I know sometimes we hear that we didn't listen to the public, that they didn't have any input, and but it's my understanding when this first started, the consultant was open to and got written comments from anyone who wanted to give them, and that those were considered. Can you give me an idea of that process? Whoever wants to respond to that.
Absolutely. Thank you, President. Councilor Jones. The process has had multiple opportunities for people to start at the beginning and think about visioning, all the way through drafts that they help to create, brainstorm, create, and then opportunities to look at those drafts and actually provide written revisions. For the most part, I would say that the public comments have been most helpful when they're specific about additional policies they want to see, about additional narrative emphasis that needed to be added to the chapters, and those were certainly added in the green line that's in front of you throughout this review and approval process. Certainly we've also heard a lot of public comments just asking for, in general, for the process to slow down, in general not to do it, in general not to touch the sector development plans. And in that case, we've tried to explain to people the need for a change to our system in terms of both the policy and the regulations. And the process has continued in some extent over people's objections that we slow it way down. I will say that initially we thought that this update to the comprehensive plan, not a complete rewriting, but an update, would be about a year's process. It's now 2 years, and we feel that we've given adequate opportunities for everyone to weigh in and to provide the useful comments that have been incorporated into the draft.
Thank you.
Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. One question I have, and many of the residents on Albuquerque's west side are very concerned regarding the view protections. And that issue has come up time and time again at several of the meetings that I have been to. Has there been anything incorporated into this policy regarding view protections?
Mr. President, Councilor Sanchez, yes, the comprehensive plan has considerable language and policies and actions for protecting views, but more importantly, the regulatory tool, the proposed integrated development ordinance, incorporates the existing Coors Corridor Plan, the regulations from the Coors Corridor Plan, the regulations from the Northwest Mesa Escarpment Plan, and other documents that establish view protections as overlays.
And also, not just from the west side residents, but residents that are across the city, Brelis community, the Brelis organization, Martinez Town, they were very concerned regarding the historical values of their communities. And are those historical values going to be protected in this plan?
President, Councilor, I believe actually the proposed comprehensive plan before you has much better policy guidance about both older neighborhoods that aren't recognized as historic districts formally, but also those that are recognized as historic districts, both in the community identity chapter, which in today's comprehensive plan is half of the chapter and has half of our attention. In the update, it's a complete chapter. And the heritage conservation chapter similarly has been fleshed out as its own chapter and has much more discussion, not only about the cultural landscapes, which include view protections, but also older neighborhoods, historic neighborhoods, acequias, the Bosque view, the views of our sandias, the things that make this community great for all of us.
And one more question, and this is in regards to outreach to the community. You said you've been doing this now for almost 2 years. We are dealing with the art project, and the concerns there are the public was not engaged or involved. Do you feel there's been enough engagement and involvement with this community that we won't have the same problems or issues regarding the art project?
President, Councilor, I believe if it's a straight comparison, I think we've got the art project beat hands down just in terms of the number of meetings we've held, the different formats of meetings, the working groups, the focus groups, the visioning sessions, the hands-on mapping sessions, the one-on-one meetings, the outreach at neighborhood associations and coalition meetings, and I really believe that we've tried to go above and beyond within this time frame to beat the bushes and meet anyone who wanted to meet with us and discuss their concerns and try to incorporate the positive requests for changes into the document. But I do believe you will hear tonight from the public that we didn't listen enough and that there weren't enough opportunities and that people still want an opportunity to look at this document more closely and give more feedback. And I will just say that from our perspective, the feedback that we've gotten has really trickled to solitary drops that haven't made the changes in the document that we feel warrant additional time.
And one more question, Mr. President. One of the other concerns that was brought up is many of these neighborhoods do not fill once this plan is adopted, but they will have the same input when it comes to hearings regarding zone changes, any other issues involving land use cases. Where now they only have that input and they have a process in place where they have the opportunity to come and appeal and to object to some of these plans or new developments in the community.
Mr. President, Councilor Sanchez, first I should clarify that the comprehensive plan does not address review and approval or community outreach regarding individual developments. All of those issues are dealt with in the regulatory document in the integrated development ordinance. However, I would say generally that many of those processes that you described would still continue as a part of the under the proposed IDO. That would include the Environmental Planning Commission. Would still consider zone change requests and that sort of thing. Neighborhoods could still appeal projects that they had disagreements with. This is obviously some changes are proposed in the IDO to some degree to streamline development, but many of those processes do still remain.
Thank you.
President, Councilor, I would also just say that I do believe that the policies in the comprehensive plan that they could draw from during those approval processes are much more clarified. I think the updates provide a lot more clear direction about the types of growth that are appropriate and where they're appropriate, and give clear guidance as we develop the regulations and as we contemplate those zone changes about what the community vision says is appropriate. So I think this update actually helps people give good guidance to the city about how to grow and what kinds of projects we want in which locations and how they should look.
Thank you.
Councilor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Also, I'd like to offer my thanks and congratulations to you all and everybody who worked on this. I think you guys did an awesome job. I really like the logic that you used in putting this together so that it is readable and comprehensible to someone like me with zero background in planning. That's really a tribute to the 2 years of hard work that you put in. And also, I think that everybody, you guys really did a great job in talking to the public and being as receptive as you are and have been with them. So that's really appreciated. I do want to touch on sector plans, though, for just a little bit. And I've had this conversation, I think, all three of you, and probably others as well. And told it with great pains to make sure that whatever appeared in the sector plan was carried over. So that's great. So it seems to me that at this point, the sector plans are kind of, I hate to say not necessary, because somebody's really going to get upset with that, but almost they're duplicitous. It's something that, if it's in the comprehensive plan, why do we look at the sector plan? So going forward, do you see a need for future sector plans or changes to existing sector plans? And if so, does that mean that we would have to amend the comp plan?
President, Councilor Gibson. I think the sector plans include a level of detail that will never be possible in a comprehensive plan. And so much of the narrative content from those sector plans does not appear in the comprehensive plan. We try to talk about the nuances of the different community planning areas in the comprehensive plan, but certainly will never get to the level of detail in those sector plans. That said, it's narrative content. It does not have a policy power. It does not have a regulatory power. So the ABC to Z project is certainly attempting to take those actionable parts of the sector development plan, the policies into the comp plan, the regulations into the integrated development ordinance, because that's how we can actually guide development and land use decisions in the city. So from a policy perspective and a regulatory perspective, the idea is that you would no longer need to create standalone sector development plans for each and every neighborhood within the city of Albuquerque. I'll point out, as Andrew mentioned in this presentation, only about half of the city is covered by those small plans today. Doing another 60 for the other half would be not only time-consuming, a lot of good community planning work, certainly, but we're attempting to do the same kind of engagement through a process that we have the staff for, that we have the budget for, that we could do every 5 years so that they don't fall out of date, they don't become obsolete, but that we can keep the ideas, the community engagement, the capital projects, the coordination with other departments on an ongoing basis using the long-range department staff that we have. So altogether, we are attempting to replace what is done through sector development plans today with something that can continue in the future. Policies in the comp plan, regulations in the integrated development ordinance, and the community planning area assessment process that creates a way for us to work with communities in the future to understand what they need.
Thank you. If I may, just one other thing. So that brings up another thing I wanted to comment on. Incorporating a 5-year cycle going forward, I think is a great idea. It will allow a time, specific time and venue for neighborhoods to be able to talk about, what's particular or peculiar about their neighborhoods that they, want to protect or see developed. So that's a great idea, and I'm really glad you put that in. So thank you.
Councilors, other questions before we hear public comment? I do have one, which is, as I understand it, and from following it along through the path to date, there haven't been substantial policy changes in this document versus the comp plan that we already had. That's only been, what, significant updates, maybe only 2 in its lifetime until now. So I wanted to just, as I see it, kind of the key strengthening, if you want to call it that. One of them is the vision chapter, where it does talk about how we're going to accommodate growth going forward. And it also talks about protecting traditional single-family neighborhoods. And we'll talk some more about some of the neighborhoods that are more challenged in that sense, because of the history of zoning. And then the kind of the shift of terminology on some of the transit corridors. I did want to ask one thing about that. On the transit corridors, the proposed ART project, or the ART project that's under construction, includes a leg up to Uptown. Why isn't Louisiana one of those premium, that part of it at least, one of those premium transit corridors? Didn't seem to be, at least on the map from the best I could see. And I was just wondering about that, since it does connect Uptown to the Fair and Rounds area.
Mr. President, councilors, Louisiana is noted here as a major transit corridor, and I think it's primarily because under the current proposal for the ART project, there would not be additional stops along Louisiana. The system would just run from Central to the uptown area and then back down. But Louisiana itself would continue to have the local services that already exist on that route.
Okay, and
Further north.
so if something happened, let's say to the fairgrounds, something different happened, we put in a rapid transit stop somewhere along that route, that would be the kind of thing that would be updated in the 5-year revisiting of the plan.
Mr. President, councilors, that's absolutely correct.
Okay. And then I think the other big thing, that the guiding principles was another sort of real new thing. I know a lot of that language already existed perhaps in the old, the existing comp plan, but those guiding principles were kind of really highlighted, I think, in the new version, and that they include strong neighborhoods, mobility, economic vitality, equity, sustainability, and community health, all of which, especially in District 2 and some of the older areas that have been underdeveloped, underdeveloped further on in, less attention been paid to them, underfunded, just less attention than was deserved. These issues of economic vitality, equity, and community health, I think, are really important, and really, I do appreciate that the way that was strengthened within the plan. And then the idea of areas of change versus areas of consistency, and that the traditional neighborhoods are within the area, strictly within the area of consistency. Is that correct?
Mr. President, councilors, that is generally correct. For single-family neighborhoods, this is referencing land use, not necessarily zoning in the core of the city.
Right, but as a policy of the city, the plan is saying that we recognize the areas that are more greenfield within the city limit or even the county, where development may be appropriate, and then areas where the development, if I could use that term, is much more fine-grained and sensitive, as you say, to the lower density residential areas, while recognizing that there are corridors that border those areas, and that's an important seam, if you will, between a higher density activity area and a traditional neighborhood that needs to be treated very carefully. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that, because it wasn't like that we reinvented the wheel on this. Now, within the IDO and all of the regulatory process, we're not reinventing it necessarily either. I would say we're certainly changing the process more there, and this document is only policy and not about process. So I agree, there's been some confusion about that. Seem to meet with people and explain again and again, but I think perhaps that we did such a great branding job with ABC to Z, and it is intended to work together, but I think there's been some confusion as to whether the comp plan, which is our policies and strong and good policies, and were before, that I think we're better under this plan, is not the same as regulatory process. Is there any other questions? We'll go on to public comment. We have 9 people signed up to speak. And as we said, we'll allow 3 minutes per person. Mr. Webb, did you have anything else? Okay. We are going to have 3 minutes per person, because we know it's a lot to comment on. So we'll get started, and there will be a bell at the 2.5-minute mark, which gives you a warning to try to wrap up your comments before the 3-minute time. So we'll get started with, and if you'll come forward when you hear your name and sit in the front row, we can move along without a lot of delay. First 3 people are, first is Bianca Mancinias, Elizabeth Vensil, and Robert Nelson are the first 3 folks to speak. So Bianca, you're leading off.